Hello, Mr. Knight, thanks for coming in, appreciate it.
You bet.
All your hard work has been wonderful, and we're here on beginning of December. Mr. Knight had jury duty for a while.
6 days.
6 days, and learned a lot, and I have jury duty next month, so I'm learning once again from Mr. Knight. So
maybe you'll get 6 days too.
Yeah, you never know, so appreciate it. As you can see, I presented a document to Mr. Knight, kind of talking about student engagement, which was his goal, and then also just in regards to him being able to walk around a very busy classroom with 33 kids. It was voter participation.
Yep.
What do you remember most vividly about the lesson?
Well, I remember that when we had talked originally, I had already changed my plan because I had already noticed flaws before I even started it.
Good.
So my instincts told me that I needed to set up outside of classroom experience. So when they did their actual primary vote, I made them walk out in the hall, and then they had to go through kind of a soft process of voting. And then we came back in and processed, counted the vote total. So there was already changes before.
Right.
Before even
teaching.
Yeah. And so after I made those changes, I felt like that was, my instincts were right, and that was the right thing to do, and it was much better.
Busy classroom with very little space, I think that
Yeah,
I tend to
it's
do.
kind of like as you get closer to the play starting, and you start thinking about the performance, and you're like, that performance isn't going to go. So I made those quick adjustments, and it really was a slick day. It actually was pretty fun.
I agree, I really enjoyed it. What were the key points that you noted about the lesson?
Well, I think the key thing for me was I felt like the students bought into the process a little bit more by actually having to go out, mark the ballot. Even though it's an easy process, there were still students that messed up.
Yeah.
And they were kind of some of my students before that thought everything's so easy, but just by doing a simple voting exercise, they realized that there is some mess ups that you would have by not doing it. So the action part was really good.
A lot of lifelong lessons, real life situations,
Yeah.
that's good.
I think the idea of actually doing it versus talking about it, it was good for them to just go out and do that real soft voting process.
Doing is always a better tool.
It definitely in this case, it worked out.
So it sounds like you kind of already answered the accomplishment of the lesson, is just getting kids to do that and participate and learn.
Sure.
Talk about the tally process that you had. When
For voting?
Yeah, when the kids came back into the class, you had kids tally and discuss who's going to be a winner.
Yeah, I tried to give them the idea that, voting's local. And a lot of times I think they feel like there's this big beast that is collecting everything. And the notion of a precinct tallying up their votes and then certifying it is a real act. And so what we did is we had to look at a huge ballot because of all the Democratic candidates. And what I had them do is each table had to process their own votes, and then they had to put them up essentially on the board.
Yeah.
Right? So each table was a precinct, and they said, well, X amount for this candidate, X amount for this candidate, and then they had to write them up there. So then we could see, in theory, like the whole county, this is how the whole county would have voted.
And it makes sense, and in my other two lessons I wrote in my document, I think he's already answered as far as what he observed. You discussed that, what he's observed with the kids, and then also the behaviors of the students. I think, for the most part, you answered that. It seems like to me, from what we've gathered here, the student engagement was pretty doggone good.
Well, it's good to get another set of eyes on it because, like I said, I have a tendency to have a high opinion of myself sometimes, right? Well, so as a teacher, you're like, well, I already know how to do everything. And so it's good to get another set of eyes. And, Pat, you did a nice job mapping out the room, and what the document shows is the flow, where I was walking, who I was talking with, some people that maybe weren't as engaged as they should have been. And what I like about this is it kind of shows me where I made my decisions and who paid the price. So who was the opportunity cost? Which was the group that didn't get enough help versus which the group got way too much. So like if I was to look forward, I got a table in the back, which I already know about, and I got a table up front that take the majority of my energy. So that means the tables over here that behave get less of me.
Yep.
And is that fair? No, it's not. So, I'm always trying to think of ways to prevent that. and I certainly haven't perfected it.
Yeah.
But, you know, it does
It's a
reinforce, it does reinforce what I kind of already know,
Yeah.
but it makes me reflect on it in a different way, and makes me maybe be more purposeful in how I get to those kids that aren't as verbally needy. They do what they're supposed to, versus the kids that are a little bit more off task.
How often have you had kids rotate tables?
And that's not much. And you know, and I've done it in the past where each unit, you got new table mates.
Yeah.
Sometimes the seniors, I have a tendency not to move them as
Yeah,
much,
the
just,
seniors, yeah.
just because of their age.
Mhm.
But you know, I always go back and forth on that, and I think it's probably good practice to move them, and I probably should. I should do more mixed grouping and moving them around. But you know, I get a little bit complacent and a little bit comfortable, so that's a good thing for me to consider.
Talk about your the success of the lesson, and how happy were you with it? What are some things that you really like? What are some things that you maybe would have done differently?
Well, what I really liked is it showed the students how kind of a primary process works. It showed the students the issues you have if one party has multiple candidates where one party doesn't.
Yeah.
It does show that there's not as more identifiable winner. So I thought that they really did a good job showing the real world process. So the things that maybe could have gone a little bit better, I'm not 100% certain on that. Maybe taking it the next step, instead of them putting it on the board, maybe we do it more digital, where each class, you know, sits at their table and then they upload it to a master document.
Yeah.
You know, that everybody can see in real time when they're tallying the votes, kind of a little bit more realistic in that regard. So, you know, I could have added a little bit of technology to it, but at the end of the day, voting's pretty low tech.
Yeah. I was
mean,
just thinking that as you're talking about it, this is kind of the process which
yeah,
our nation is doing.
yeah, it's pretty low tech except for the counting. Obviously, where
right.
it's scanned through machine, so we didn't have, you know, maybe a secret ballot as much. But I did do the secret ballot by making them turn the votes into me outside of the room.
Yep.
And then when I dispersed the votes, there was no way for them to know whose vote was whose. So it was pretty secret. But you know, there's some other things I could try to make it a little bit more realistic. But I felt for the time constraints and the main thrust of the assignment or the lesson, it went really well.
And I don't know if you remember, and you're kind of alluding to it, but when you had the kids come out of the
Yeah.
hallway, you
Yeah.
did say to them multiple times, this is kind of the way it really is. You have to
Yeah.
wait in line, you have to be quiet, you have to go
Yeah.
through all this process.
Right.
It has to be kind of secretive, you're
Yeah.
not gonna know necessarily.
Right.
I thought that was good, you know, you're cueing your students, you keep
Mhm.
students are engaged while they're
Yeah.
waiting for voting, but also, they know that this is going to be the environment in which you're gonna be
Right.
walked in when they really do it.
And that's a good point. What I did notice is that they were interested enough in the activity to be on task.
Yeah.
And they were interested enough to not want to goof too much, because they're like, well, I'm gonna miss what seems to be a really easy process. And so they went right in line and quick through the process, and they were done.
And I thought they did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
And then that kind of talks about that question that you've kind of already answered with high activity involvement with the kids, that they
Yeah.
were always doing something. You know,
Yeah.
there was not really, you know, any dead time or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, maybe, here's a tough question, I think, at least I always struggle
Yeah.
with, is what are some things you could do to continue to increase student involvement
Yeah.
as we move forward?
Well, I just had a day like that yesterday. So yesterday, 3 of the class was awesome, 1 class tanked. And it was probably way too much me. You know, it was like, you know, and I was trying to overcompensate for time away. And so I was trying to really push a lot of material that they should have already known. And it got a little long, and some of the kids were tuning me out by the end. And so today, I countered that with all the work we did yesterday. I put it into question format,
Show
told the
me what you
kids
know.
it was a check for understanding, told them it was gonna be this is a snapshot of like a third of the test.
Good.
They went in for 10 minutes, silent sustained, worked on it, then 7 minutes, they gotta talk with their table mates, and then the last few minutes, then we got full class discussion. And today was night and day different.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, it's kind of as a young teacher versus more veteran teacher. You know, in my more veteran years, I've learned that those days happen sometimes, that sometimes the lesson doesn't always hit the mark. and that you have to retool for the very next day.
Right.
And to get mad about it and to try to like push it onto the student is only going to make it worse the next day. Because then you're gonna build more of that animosity, like, why aren't you doing this the way I want you to do it? So instead of letting that kind of take over me,
So true.
I try to just say, new day, this is where I messed up, this is what we're doing today, and it was amazing, they were all about it. They were genuinely asking me questions they never considered before, and so I put it, we recovered. And granted, it was the day after Thanksgiving break. But you still have a day after Thanksgiving break.
You still have that day.
You still have that day, you don't get to just
Right,
say,
right.
well, done.
Yeah, you answered pretty much all my interpretive questions
Dang it.
already. Yeah, no, that's.
Foreshadowing.
That's good. Your next steps.
Yeah.
As, since then, I believe you have an assessment.
Well, I do, yeah, well, and again, this is new territory, because I've never been away from my kids for 6 days due to
Right.
jury duty. So now I was in a world where I was teaching distance, like doing a blended class
So hard,
essentially,
yeah.
where they're being trusted to do all this work on their own, and then I have to come back and try to figure out how much do I need a formative assess before I can give them a test. So I'm supposed to be testing tomorrow and Thursday, that's not
Okay.
gonna happen. We talked, and it looks like next week. So again, we're making trade-offs, so down the line, that means our next unit's gonna have to be shortened, but I feel like that's the right thing to do, right? So, and what do you do? I mean, so as far as trying to get that assessment going, this piece has been pushed to the side because I gotta bring in the history of voting, and then that piece is gonna be tied back in on the end.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's kind of out there.
Yes.
But we had to move. I couldn't wrap it up the way I wanted to yet, because I needed to get this history stuff in
Sure.
so we can have the
Oh,
final
tight it,
piece.
yes. So, in our last video,
Yeah.
Mr. Knight was talking about a common assessment with his
Yeah.
2 other colleagues. My question to you is,
Yeah.
what did those other colleagues do during those 6 days?
They continued on the same
Okay.
scheduled pace,
Okay.
and I was technically on the same scheduled pace, I
Yeah,
just wasn't able to
landed
check
version,
in.
Yes.
So it's really hard to check in that type of environment, because I really couldn't do it much work, because I'm doing jury duty and no access
Right.
to
And
technology and
don't
all
know
that
what your
stuff.
students are
Right,
necessarily.
so I just had to trust in, my plans,
Sure.
which, sometimes can get interpreted differently when it's going through a sub.
Right.
And so you don't, right, so you think you have it clear, and then they're like, I don't know if I got that right. So I'm working through that.
Sure.
And, the students aren't always the most helpful
Right.
in trying to,
When you come back and catch up and bring
Right,
up.
so we're working through that, but it's
Now,
gonna be okay.
Did they already give the assessment, or are they waiting? for
No, that'll be Wednesday, they're gonna give it this week, they're not
Okay.
waiting for me, which I don't think they should.
Yeah.
I think that would be a lot to expect. If they're ready to go, there's no reason to make their kids wait another week.
It'll be interesting, I mean, I'm thinking all these questions that are not necessarily on here,
Yeah.
but it'll be interesting how, your students do
Yeah.
with the, assessment versus
Yeah.
theirs, if you see any, I don't know, I didn't even know if I had a
And,
prediction to be honest.
well, and how will I'm probably gonna alter my assessment some, in
Right.
all fairness to the students.
Right.
So it'll be maybe even a tough one to see, we might be able to get some understanding of how do we do standards wise for unit 3. It might be really hard to do a direct comparison of, let's say, scores, but maybe standard, I'll have to look into that one, it's gonna be different, 'cause it'll throw us in a little loop.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So where do you go after this unit?
One of my favorites, we go to civil rights.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, what we do on this one is we usually highlight, some of the Bill of Rights, like, we like to do the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah.
And what we do is we introduce the students to several court cases. And so what we try to do is establish a timeline. And like, this is what we used to think about it, this is how it's changed, this is how it's stayed the same. And we show all sorts of different cases for them to kind of get their own thinking
Right.
in line of what does it really mean to have civil liberties or civil rights, what does that really look like? So it's a fun unit, you do a lot of 4th Amendment stuff, 8th Amendment, we do some 1st Amendment. And so the kids like it, but I always joke with them that we do this in their senior year so they're not too dangerous. right? We don't want them to know their rights until they're ready to leave.
And they're ready to go, full-fledged.
They're just like, whatever, right? It's just kind of funny how that works.
Well, that's good. Now, one of the things that I need to do is show, and
Okay.
you're not gonna be able to see that necessarily,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's upside
Yeah,
down or,
something.
you know,
But you got it, they're there.
Okay, so, this is reflecting on Mr. Knight's, standards, and I'm gonna have him read them.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to submit a copy to my
Yeah.
professor, but I wanted you
Yeah,
to.
this
um,
feels very much like court.
Yes,
My
Yes.
deposition here. Okay, so you want me to read these?
you don't need to, you can just
Oh,
read
you
them
want me to read 'em
yourself.
here?
You don't have to
Okay.
read them out
Okay.
loud.
Uh-huh.
They're gonna see them.
Okay, yeah.
But discussing all the different standards, I'd
Mhm.
rather read that out loud and bore people to death.
Sure.
But I can summarize, Mr. Knight did a great job. In discussion today with discussing of the standards is fulfillment of the first video and then the reflection post-conference afterwards. But also, I think in many ways, probably demonstrated it without typically necessarily thinking about it consciously, kind of like what he alluded to when we met way back in November.
Yeah.
And when you're done with
Yeah,
that,
got
here's, I typed out pretty much what you see on this raw document in regards to student engagement, timestamp, and then your ability to wander around the class and have kids engaged.
Yeah.
Basically, I think my last question would be,
Yeah.
and we kind of talked about this before we went on air, but the students that weren't necessarily always engaged, you pretty much had predicted that was going to be the case, and we know that
Yeah.
their scores, assessment scores, or what they've demonstrated in the class in the past might not be up to like where everybody else is at.
Yeah.
And this made you, conscious of it and all that. What are some things which you might do to continue to keep them maybe more engaged or have them be more engaged?
Well-
We talked a little bit about moving them, but other things you might think of?
Yeah, like today we had a moment where we had to have that talk. And there's been times where we've had to stop in class and reference
Yep.
social contract.
Yep.
And so, we've had to reference it and we've had to have some talks as to why we can't follow it. And so we've had some of that. Today we again had to talk about purpose and reason for learning it. So those work for a little bit, but
Yeah.
they're like stopgap.
Short-lived.
And and in the past, and I haven't got into it much this year, and mainly because I guess I rely on my instincts and my years of experience that I know I can make it through the class with them. And so then
Yeah.
we go on to another day and I try to plan some new way to get their attention. But I think we talked, I think it was before, and if we repeat it, I apologize. But I think we talked about the idea of regrouping and changing groups at the tables more often.
Yeah.
As a tactic to try
I think
to,
you're right, yep.
and I don't know if it was here or later,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but I used to in the past, every unit,
Switch them up.
they would have to have new tables.
Yeah,
And, and it's always a fine line, because kids don't like the feeling of having a seat assigned. Like, it's like one of their, student privileges in their minds, But, you can be fun, you can joke around with them and say, well, and I'll tell you what, if you don't wanna do assigned seats, that's fine, you just won't get study guides. And so then they're like, okay, well, we'd rather have a study guide. And I was like, okay, then I guess we solved that problem.
Yeah.
I don't really care, I'm just
Right.
messing around with them, but just enough to let them know, well, I'm in charge of class and you like study guides, then I can tell you where to sit.
Right.
It's like a trade-off, it's like
There you
negotiation, the
go.
kids are like, well, okay, that seems somewhat fair, I guess you can do that. Whether I would never do that to them, but the
Right.
point is, it's kind of like, you can have some fun
Give
with
and
them, and they're like, oh, okay, that seems like a fair trade-off. But I do think that would be probably, especially in that class, probably a good idea. I do know, just the nature of that group, that it may make it worse.
Right.
Right? Like sometimes moving people, like, is
That doesn't work, so let's go back to what
so
we
like
had.
as a young
because that
teacher,
doesn't work
as a young
either.
teacher, I probably fell into that trap
Oh,
of,
me
well, I'm
too.
just gonna move that person,
Yeah.
and that's gonna solve my problem. That doesn't always work, and sometimes, like I said, it can actually cause it to.
Backfire.
Yes,
For sure.
so it's always like, you know,
Yeah.
so that one I always hesitate, then
Careful
as
what
they
you
get,
ask for.
seems like as they get older, that's something they don't like as much, they don't
Yeah.
like to be moved and
They're
told.
territorial, and they also, you know,
Yeah.
that's a rudimentary, yeah.
But I do believe that it's got some value in it, and you just gotta think of ways to do it. Like, it could be like, well, for this activity, I'm gonna have you grouped here. And we did some of that at the beginning of the year when we were getting to know each other. It was more like grouping, and then they kinda got established.
And you talked about the cues and
Yeah.
keep the kids, you know, you have certain cues throughout the
Yeah.
class, so at the beginning
Yeah,
of the
they work-
class,
they work
and that
too.
works,
Yeah.
but then after a while, it's short one.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have, I appreciate very much, Mr. Knight.
That's always fun.
Thank you.
You bet, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you.
Yep.